right.
Sybil, would you kindly unmute yourself, sir? And
Hello.
Leon,
Yeah, I think we should be good. It's not that many
I think
people.
you're good to go, Randy. Please.
So everyone, hopefully you received the email yesterday with our agenda for today. So one of the things we'd like to do, one is thank you for taking the time to be a part of this digitalization steering committee. We could not do this work without your support. And so we're greatly appreciative of you taking the time out of your business schedules to be a part of this to help us advance digitalization with respect to life sciences. One of the things we'd like to do is, for those of you I haven't met, I'm Randy Bradley, so I serve as EVP for Digital Transformation and Life Sciences for BSMA. I'm also an associate professor of Information Systems and Supply Chain Management at the University of Tennessee. And what we'd love to do is give each person an opportunity to go around, introduce yourselves, tell us your company, your role, what you do there, and then that will follow with the agenda as previously articulated. So let me to try to help make sure we move in the right sequence here. I'll start with what I'm seeing on screen. So we'll go with Devendra. If you would go ahead and jump in first.
I'm yours humbly, yours truly, the Executive Director of the Biosupply Management Alliance. My pillow, my level of comfort comes from the fact that I really come from the entertainment industry, where digitalization totally destroyed the product, meaning the DVD and the CD, the music and the video. And out of the ashes has emerged the whole digital workspace, where it all started with digital marketing, digital production, data analytics, digital collaboration, and being in the cloud. And in a matter of 10 years, we have come very, very far. And that's what excites me to be a part of this team. So thank you, Randy.
My pleasure, Devendra. Thank you for your support and helping to assemble this team. Next, we'll go with Chad Sklodowski.
Yeah, so Chad Sklodowski, I work for Pfizer in the clinical supply chain. So I lead a function that supports all of the digital systems that we use to enable the clinical supply chain in order to conduct our clinical trials. But as a part of that effort, I also frequently get involved in evaluating new emerging technologies for things like digitization, blockchain, AI, those types of initiatives. So I've been keen to participate in many of the research projects at University of Tennessee. So happy to join the team here.
Thank you, Chad. It's good to have you. Thomas, we'll go to you next. Thomas Panzer.
Okay, yeah, my name is Thomas Panzer. I'm heading the global supply chain for Bayer Pharmaceuticals. So global footprint, and one of our strategic goals is certainly also to evolve and develop to another future level of a supply chain, and digitalization plays a significant role towards this. We started 2017 to put a roadmap together, a digital roadmap, adapted this roadmap several times, did some POCs and proof of concepts and pilots. So also in the blockchain area. So, and I'm really, yeah, I would say I'm not the expert, but very much, yeah, included within the discussions, and I'm driving this from the executive perspective.
I just wanted to mention for everyone's benefit that Thomas was one of the first founders of BSMA when he worked out of the Bayer facility in San Francisco. Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Next will be Atul.
Hi guys, I'm a newbie on this panel. Devendra, thanks for inviting me to it. Just to give you a very brief background, I've had a fairly long and an eclectic career. I've transitioned multiple industries. I started my career in CPG, went into medical devices, biologics, pharmaceuticals, generics, the whole 9 yards. But why I'm actually quite happy to join this panel, because I've had the opportunity or privilege, as I was saying to Randy, of leading very large scale digital transformations for 2 large companies in the life sciences. I learned my tricks with Unilever doing this, and then applied it for Bristol Myers Squibb and Mylan. most recently. So I can say I've been there, done that a few times.
Thank you, Atul. Let's go to Chris. Chris Horan.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm currently Chief Technical Operations Officer at a small regenerative medicine company called SanBio. I got connected to Devendra and BSMA when I was head of supply chain at Genentech and then head of supply chain at Roche in Switzerland. And since then have left for smaller companies. So this is my second small company with a broader role, but I've been interested in technology's application to what we do for about 20 years, led a few ERP implementations. I'm very interested in blockchain and its applicability to serialization, track and trace, Internet of Things. So I've been passionate about this for some time. Good morning.
Perfect, Chris. Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. Let's go to Dottie. I see you're on. We'll go ahead and let you jump in here.
Okay, I'm with BSMA, as everybody else here knows. And by the way, I just wanted to mention Chris Horan was also one of the founding members way back when.
Wow.
Hey, Chris.
Good morning.
Also, I'm just a IT person for BSMA, doing all the background work.
Thank you, Dottie. We couldn't do it without you, that's for sure. Heather Erickson.
Sure, Heather Erickson. I head up global supply chain and business operations for Sangamo Therapeutics. We are a pre-commercial cell and gene therapy company based in California with operations in the UK and France as well. And under my business operations side, I am the lead, I suppose, for our IT roadmap for tech ops. So it's sort of all the different pieces that need to come together there as we're looking on bringing on board our second in-house manufacturing facility later this year. So a number of moving parts, both within and outside the supply chain. But right now I'm starting to wade into the ERP implementation piece, which is not my favorite, but we'll make it work.
Heather, I think we can all feel your pain on that. No one looks forward to it. It's just a necessary evil.
Well, I put it in the category of if any of these systems were developed with the biopharma or, well, anything remotely this industry in mind, we'd be in a much better place. But I can't have more conversations about this is not your average commodity space, and cell and gene therapy in particular. It's just it's a lot of shoehorning and workarounds, and that's frustrating given the amount of money we're putting in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I can tell you those in the manufacturing sector would still share your sentiments, even though they believe it's more designed for them. It's still just not a nice fit for most business processes.
Yeah.
So let's go go ahead.
To add a word to what Heather said, she deals with a personalized supply chain in the cell and gene therapy, which makes her job probably one of the most difficult that we face in our industry.
Yeah, everything we do is cold chain with both chain of custody and chain of identity for clinical stage. So it's interesting to figure out how you do that at scale with systems that aren't particularly configurable.
Right. Leon Trevette.
He's on mute.
Leon, I believe you're still muted.
Shall we send him a message? Leon, you are on mute.
Yeah, he may have stepped away for a moment because I don't see him. I think his phone is still connected. Actually, no, I see him now. He's talking.
He's there. I think we've got a sound quality issue.
Okay.
All right, we'll come back to Leon. Let's go to Subbu.
Hey, hello everyone. My name is Subbu Panigrahi. I'm a senior director in the pharmaceutical development and manufacturing department of Gilead Science. So this is my first meeting in this forum. So happy to be here. But I have been involved in the BSMA as a participant in the past few years. Have been with Gilead for about 7 years in the manufacturing and supply chain function. My current role is I'm the business process owner of product lifecycle management and product registration from a regulatory operations standpoint. For Gilead, I have been with the life science pharma industry for about 15 years. Worked at Biogen and before that at Novartis, mostly in the manufacturing and supply chain space. What really excites me to look at some of these digital transformation efforts is, Gilead is embarking on a transformative journey to bring about 10 plus path-breaking therapies in the next 10 years. And you guys are probably aware that we are fast approaching or fast becoming a oncology, hematology leader, which hasn't been traditionally our sweet spot. Traditionally we have been a leader in antiretrovirals. So this is something that I'm really looking forward to the lessons learned or the collective learning here, how we can take advantage of the digital transformation, AI, ML, to help us, get ahead of the strategic goals, strategic priorities that we have for the next 10 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Subbu. Leon, we'll go to you now. I think you may have your audio resolved.
I believe so. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Sorry for that. Yeah, technology, right? Being on the digital steering committee. So I'm Leon Trevert. I work for Illumina. So those that don't know, that's around next generation DNA sequencing. To touch on Devendra's bit about a personalized supply chain, doesn't really get any more personal than someone's DNA. It's cold chain. It has the same complications that Heather was talking about. Global footprint, operations in APJ, EMEA, and in the Americas. So my role, I lead global integrated planning. So that's all of our plan and S&OP process and everything to handing a plan off to the manufacturing teams to go make. Distribution planning, global supply chain master data, global analytics for supply chain. And I'm also the leader and sponsor of our digital breakthrough objective. The way that we're approaching that, there's two aspects to it. One is digital and the other one is digitization. Digitization being more about scale and efficiency, and digital really thinking about how do we unlock better value propositions and get closer to the customer. So for those that don't know, our instruments, when we sequence DNA, are IoT connected. So we can actually get a lot of AI and ML built in software wise to tell us some insight about how the machine's performing, how the customer's results are working, and join that all up and be a bit proactive about it. So that's kind of the space that I'm playing in at the moment.
Perfect. Thank you, Leon, and thank you for joining us. And as I mentioned earlier, while some of you were joining, we have a fair number of other individuals who will be part of our digitalization steering committee that are not able to be with us today. So we'll make sure they get at least a record of what we discussed today. What I'd like to do as we continue to move forward is really kind of give you a high-level overview of what we perceive the charter to be for this. And again, these are things that we can adjust as needed. What we do need to have some consensus around what is it that we want to achieve, and what is my expectation of each of you as you decide. Some of you as you continue to decide, and others as you continue to engage. Is we've been looking across life sciences and say, there are a lot of opportunities out there. But at some point, some organization that does not necessarily have a biased perspective or doesn't necessarily have an ulterior motive of trying to sell you something, we really need to get in and help organizations, whether they're large, small, pre-commercial, or post-commercial market, understand how do you build out, or what are the practices to actually engage in, develop, and deploy a digital supply chain roadmap. And not something that's just pie in the sky, but something that's extremely practical, that regardless of where you are, you know where and how to engage with the resources that you have available to you. And that's part of what we'd like to be for the life sciences community, at least with respect to the steering committee under the umbrella of BSMA. Another thing that we believe is extremely necessary is really trying to identify the leading, what are those processes within, we think of across the supply chain, both end to end now. What are those processes, and how do we prioritize those processes when it comes to both digitization, as you heard Leon really pull out and enunciate, as well as digitalization, when we go beyond just the scalability, but what ultimately is going to lead us into transforming our business models and transforming how we go to market and how we are perceived in the marketplace. Organizations are still struggling and challenged with respect to where to focus relative to what the value would be from those efforts. And then the third key piece of our charter is when we think about what we're all trying to do, we're trying to improve life holistically for a global community. And so part of that is when we think about digitalization, whether it's from the manufacturing, whether it's from the R&D, whether it's from the distribution of it, or ultimately the dispensing of the products and services that are actually going to be put forth, how do we accelerate that and improve it from an efficacy standpoint? And I think that each of you, the beauty of this committee is that we do touch on these various aspects of it. And so you'll have the opportunity to weigh in. And we believe that if we can start with a focus on what are your challenges organizationally, because it's likely that those challenges aren't just isolated to your organization. And then we start to branch out and think about what does this mean for life sciences more holistically. And so again, as Heather and I said, as I told Heather once before in a conversation, don't be ashamed to be selfish in this, because at the end of the day, there has to be value for you. There has to be value for your organizations. It hits you first, but ultimately it trickles downstream and everyone else in life sciences begins to benefit from it. So I'd love to pause here and get your thoughts on at least these three primary pillars of what we believe we're trying to do by way of the steering committee. Any thoughts, concerns, or suggested modifications?
I'll jump in, Randy. It's Leon. Yeah, I think
Okay.
especially on the first one, you're right. When you go to a lot of these companies and you're looking at digital technology, you're basically getting a sell, and it is quite challenging for you to kind of pick and choose the best for your digital roadmap. So you kind of want to look at the capabilities, and then there's a process maturity assessment because we could have some really great blockchain capability, but if my business or process is just not mature enough to be able to take advantage of it, then you're not going to get the value from it. So I think that you're right. There's probably a really good space for us to help guide these businesses away from the sell into something that's really going to ultimately improve the efficacy and the life of people as we're trying to do. So I'm totally aligned to these 3 points.
And Leon, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that certainly that's something I'm struggling with regularly, is we've got people from, coming from all range of companies and sophistications,
Yeah.
but especially with a pre-commercial pipeline right now, finding a fit for purpose solution that also is relatively efficient moving into whatever's next, so we aren't having to install and then do a complete gut and rip out and rebuild down the line.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Randy, if there's a way to modify some of this to really identify sort of that it's a continuum, or sort of how do we provide guidance as companies develop to help them think about what do they look to incorporate when, and how do they do that in such a way that it's not a jerky process, but more of a as efficient an evolution as possible. Because there's some things that are just always difficult to do until you reach a certain scale or level of product development.
Yeah, that's where I was going, Heather. Sorry, Randy. Really good point. I was thinking, if we as a group can outline the capabilities, and then you have some sort of articulation around the value proposition of that, you've always got to juxtapose that with the process maturity. So we could have a smaller company that are at this level of process maturity, and these are the suite of digital options or capabilities that maybe you could go after, but you always want to be mindful of that end state so you don't design yourself into a corner. And just quickly backing up for everybody else, I'm a tech geek that plays in supply chain. So that's why I quite like this space, but I do have a day job.
Yeah, so just to build on what both of them have said from my own experience, having done it a few times, I think one thing that we all have to remember is this is not just about technology. Some people get wrapped up in selecting the best technology available out there. From my personal practical experience, technology is the last piece of the puzzle. And you have to start with your operating models, your business objectives. And the sequence, how to think about it is, believe it or not, first is people, the talent. Second is the process, as Leon, you mentioned.
Yep.
And the technology comes the last. Data and technology, both of them together. And I've, having last couple of years working with many of similar companies that you all represent here, this is where one of the places where they all fall down. They think the technology is a silver bullet.
Yep.
Mhm.
And just buy the stuff off the shelf, even though you've chosen it, the right technology or whatever, but it doesn't work because the other pieces have not been put in place. So I think just want to share that is the best practice that I have kind of experienced and developed over time, is technology comes last.
Yeah, no,
It's
I
only
totally agree.
10% of
Yeah,
the puzzle.
Atul.
45 is people and process.
Atul, I fully agree with you. In fact, I believe Leon might recall when we had a panel at the last BSMA conference, and that was one of the points we were articulating. In addition to just looking at, do you have the talent base? Do you have an organizational culture that's going to be able to support this transformation? And a lot of times, some companies just can't make the leap because of so much internal fighting and so many politics there that organizations have to overcome. So to Heather's point, there are going to be quite a bit of disparity with respect to where organizations are from a maturity standpoint, not only with respect to processes, but just where they are in terms of what they believe is actually achievable. And I'm glad you brought in the talent piece, because we've been working on some stuff with the Material Handling Institute. And one of the things we consistently find, particularly in life sciences, is the digital talent, or the talent you need for digital, oftentimes does not exist in these organizations. And they struggle to get it because they're competing against fintech, you're competing against big tech, you're competing against so many other sectors that really can dangle a carrot in front of them that oftentimes in life sciences we can't. And I've even seen this up close and personal where, when we run our own supply chain career fairs, we have life sciences companies come and hardly no one stands in line to talk to them. And that's the thing that, again, it's not necessarily the thrust of our charter, but I know BSMA is interested in that. And you've noticed we've launched this new career portal to try to really address that particular challenge, where we're really getting in front of not only mature and seasoned talent, but building a pipeline for the up and coming talent so that they see life sciences as a viable option, particularly those who are interested in supply chain and digital. Anyone else want to weigh in on these three aspects of the charter before we move on?
Randy,
Yeah,
I just want to go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, Randy, to your point right there about interest in job fairs, I'd say that's actually quite different than our experience. We've had no trouble finding people who are interested. We struggle with finding people who have the mix of interest and appropriate experience. So particularly for IT type of things, we get a lot of people who have really stellar IT backgrounds in the Bay Area. They know nothing about working in regulated environments. And I have to have more conversations about how pushing things to the point where they break doesn't work so well with the FDA. You actually need to validate. And even with established vendors, that implementation partners who don't seem to understand that being CFAR compliant is not an optional bonus activity. That's like kind of the cost of entry is probably one of our bigger stumbling blocks. Is there's a intersection of a number of skill sets here that make it more difficult than an interest.
Good. That's good to know.
Just Randy, on that point, I mean, having built a number of very large supply chain organizations, both in digital and analog, I think just to kind of build on what was said, the two things that we miss in terms of selecting our people, and my experience tells me the most critical for a supply chain guy in the digital world particularly, is cognitive and analytical capabilities. You can teach the rest. And I think what we do is we get these, I think it was Heather, I'm not sure who said that. You get a lot of great IT people, but that's not what we need. We need people with very high analytical and cognitive, which are personal skills. These are not necessarily related to experience and tenure. And if you've got that, you can teach the rest.
Yeah,
but they could be the best experience, etc. But if they don't have this in the digital world, these two skill sets are the most critical ones.
So Atul, what you've done, is you tapped into what I oftentimes say is the difference of hiring skills-based versus talent-driven hiring. Talent is adaptable. Skills are pigeonholed. And so you're
Exactly.
getting a lot of people who have the right skills, but that's all they can do. And to Heather's point, they can adapt to a highly regulated environment. But if we can shift the focus of how we hire and how we seek, then we're looking for people who have a talent that can be broadened so that now they can fill not only one gap, but multiple gaps as those gaps
Exactly.
manifest in our organizations.
Exactly, Randy, you got it.
I'm gonna go-
Absolutely.
I want to go back to Devendra because, again, I know this isn't necessarily part of our steering committee, but Devendra, is there another initiative that's really focused on that?
So before I respond to your suggestion, I'd like Chris and Thomas to share their thoughts on this slide that you presented, Randy, because Chris has been with us for 14 years. So Chris, may I call upon you, sir?
You know, I think it's good. It's comprehensive. I like the ad from Heather. You know, now that I've been at very large biopharma and very small companies that are pre-commercial, you know, this idea of creating a roadmap that is scalable, that's efficient to start with and scalable. So I think that's a good ad. Other than that, you know, I think it's a good start.
Thomas?
Yeah, maybe my addition to the threefold process, talent process technology, which I like very much from Atul, because we made precisely this mistake. We started with the technology in 2017 to build our digital roadmap. So we talked about the best systems in the world, and we forgot a little bit the process. And then after half a year working on different piecemeals of spread out initiatives and actually making no progress, we came back and said, first and foremost, we need to start with the overarching strategy. So what do we want to achieve with that? Because as it was said, digitalization or digital tools are really only tools. These are enablers to bring you to something. And this was then, so we turned the pyramid, so to say. We started to really to with the visionary goal. What do we want to achieve? What are the desire? What is the desired state? What is then our strategy in the different areas? So we defined 3 of them. Then we defined processes, and then the technology at the end. What we still missed in 2018, as we have been at this point, was still the talent part. And I'm really happy to join this discussion here, because this is very helpful to probably fill the last, I would say, the last blank spot we have still in our roadmap. I can only subscribe what was said.
So if I may respond to Randy's request, I like the word that was used earlier about selfish pursuit of values that are dear to you. From my vantage point, you are the 14, 15 of you, the initial people who have joined this steering committee. You are, in my opinion, the elite in the area of technology for our industry. And I want that group obviously to expand, but it's the greatest resource that you have. That is each other. The fact that Heather can call upon many of you and say, hey, these are my issues with SAP implementation. Panzer, you did it 8 years ago. What can you tell me? Or raise a question of talent acquisition with someone from a different company. That is the value proposition I'd like us to be very serious about. Otherwise, that's why I want your commitment and your engagement. With that said, a couple of things that I'm going to do right away when Randy puts all this together. Kevin Pegels, a year ago, outlined most graphically a plan, the game plan for Illumina. And one of those elements is digitalization. A year earlier, Stefano Volante at Genentech presented 30 minutes of a digital roadmap. So the point I'm making is we're going to make this available to you. We'll all have access to this. And to my final point on the career portal we have, and I think Heather made a really an astute observation. And I want to add to that. The reason we created the portal, the career portal, in a very, very crowded marketplace was simply the fact that we have a moral compass. The moral compass is of diversity, equality, and inclusivity. And that I see no reason why autistic people could not become the greatest data scientists, for example. So with that, I'll shut up and let Randy get back on his track.
No, Devendra, I think what you just shared, and then also what Thomas shared in his comments, really leads to this next part that I laid out, which are what are kind of the pathways or the vehicles where in which I believe we can take those pillars and then begin to put action to them. And so you've already touched on that last one, which is making sure that we collaborate amongst one another. And it's not just talking about what went well, but as I call the interesting stories, are those things that didn't quite go as planned, but yet there was something that we learned in them. And I found that far too often when we talk about digital transformations, organizations don't talk enough about the pitfalls. But those are the things we really need to be aware of so that someone else doesn't necessarily have to make the same mistakes and understands how to navigate. So we really do want this to be collaborative. And one of the things that Devendra, Dottie, myself, and other members of the BSA leadership team have been doing is working behind the scenes to develop a collaborative environment where each of the respective steering committees has a space to interact with one another that's kind of off the grid, meaning that we won't be clogging your email with things, but there will be a space that we will be letting you know about in the near future where our committee can interact with one another, the other committees can interact with themselves, and then more holistically as a community, we can interact with one another. And so we'll be having some information forthcoming with respect to that. The other thing here is determining these what I call the delivery mechanisms. You know, we've got roundtables as options. We've got webinars as options. We have panels as options. But what is it that you think is going to be best received amongst yourselves and your industry peers so that we only want to do things that are valuable? Just as you all are busy, I'm extremely busy. And we don't want to do something for the sake of doing something. It needs to have impact, and the impact needs to be relatively immediate. When people walk away saying, I now know what to do, I now know how to do it, and now I'm ready to go do it. And I think that's kind of where we are. And I know talking with many of you, apart from this setting, you feel the same way. But I wanted you to take a quick glance at these pathways. Or are there any other pathways we need to consider? Or should we modify these? What are your thoughts on these?
Randy, if I can jump in, I think I like the last bullet the best.
Yeah.
Because people learn from stories better than any other presentations. And I think if the people who've actually done that or in the middle of doing it share experiences, as you've called it, interesting stories. And I would just add to that saying, don't just share your successes, but also your pitfalls, as you rightly said, because you learn more from mistakes than you learn from successes. And I think sharing what didn't work is probably more valuable at times than what worked.
Right.
So I think that kind of a interactive storytelling session probably, and Q&A interactive, not just talking at each other,
right,
but having a discussion based on a particular case study or story or whatever you want to call it, is I've found the most effective way of communicating between ourselves.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and Randy, I would like to just add to that. I agree with the last bullet point here, and this is something I'm really looking forward to this group, from a lessons learned standpoint, because we are embarking on several transformative initiatives in Gilead, but we know that our level of maturity in this space is perhaps lower than the industry benchmark. So I am very interested to learn the success stories or lessons learned and how exactly we articulate what is deemed as success, what is success, what does success mean to us at a tangible level, tactical level. Would be very interested to learn those as we go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Sabu. Anyone else have any thoughts or comments? We have about 6 minutes remaining. I want to be very respectful of your time, and I do have at least one more ask of you after this slide here. So if there are no more thoughts, and again, if you need to take a little more time to think about it, you can always reach me or Devendra via email to let us know. Okay. All right. The next one is a little more interactive to the point of being interactive here. What we have done is outline some challenges that we are aware of, that we believe face organizations when it comes to really trying to digitalize their supply chains. And so what I'm going to do, put in the chat window here, is a URL. And if you'll take that URL and put it in your browsers, it's going to bring you to a site where you will see these items here. And what I'd like us to do is let's rank order these in terms of whatever's at the top we perceive to be the greatest challenge opposing or facing supply chain digitalization in life sciences. And then so as you rank those, we'll be able to see them on the screen here. And this will give us a sense of not only what are the challenges, but which ones that we really need to focus on trying to tackle more immediately. So if you're having any trouble seeing that or viewing it, just let me know.
Eddie, I'm not sure how to do this.
It's just drag and drop in the sequence that you'd like them to be.
But it's not activated. I don't know. I'm missing something.
There's an arrow if you click on the left.
Okay. All right. Okay. Got it.
Are you seeing this? You should be seeing a screen that looks like this on your browser.
Okay. Okay.
This is kind of where we need the Jeopardy music, Devendra. There we go. First set is in. So as the others are finished these up, what our plan will be is we'll come back together and say, okay, now we know what some of the what we all perceive to be some of the greatest challenges. Now let's try to figure out how we can start to attack these a piece at a time. We won't get all of these done. But again, it does give us something to work towards so that we're able to assess the value, or I shouldn't say the value, we'll be able to assess the activity of the steering committee, because there are some things that are going to overlap with some of the other steering committee. I know there's some things going on in the logistics steering committee that I saw that pertain to this. There's some in the clinical supply steering committee that I believe is also going to have some bearing on what we do. And so we'll be able to share these with those groups, because one of the things that we would love to see is that these steering committees don't just operate in silos, but that we actually have some cross-pollination and do some things together as well. All right. So most of the results,
Radhi, if I can
yes.
just jump in, if you don't mind. And
Yes, go ahead.
if people can bear with me or being brutally honest, I find all of these very tactical. These are
Okay.
not the greatest challenges for digitalization.
Okay.
We are missing the big ticket items. Because
Alright.
if you think about digitalization as a term, how I think about it is using digital technologies, information to transform business operations.
Hmm.
None of these are transformative.
Okay.
They're all very
Cool,
tactical
that's-
and
That's what I was effectively getting to in the non-strategic approach. Everything is a very responsive.
yeah.
And frankly, we have trouble getting departments to seriously look at things until they're already feeling the pain. And by
Mhm.
that point, it's really a, uncomfortable, exercise to try to get things in when, they don't have a lot of extra latitude to work with.
Mhm.
Yeah. And that's why I'm saying we are missing a lot of the biggest ticket items from my perspective, at least. The biggest challenge is people being able to redesign their operating systems, operating models, I should say, not systems.
Mm.
Because that's where it all starts. You need to know what you want to do, why you want to do it, before you get into these kind of lower level activities. I call these
Mhm.
activities or more, like task oriented stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How do you
I-
integrate data from multiple data streams? I'm just picking the number one here.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that's not a strategic approach. I think there is somewhere down the line non-strategic approach.
Yes, it's tied
But
for second.
my submission to the team would be that you need to lift the thinking up a couple of levels,
Mhm.
Yeah.
because those are the challenges. I think someone mentioned about having a guiding coalition in the company. Those are the challenges, really speaking. These can be addressed at much lower levels than most of us sit at. Figure it out. But
Yeah.
it's
I
it's
agree with Atul. Sorry, Atul. I agree. I put the data as last. I mean, if you haven't really got a strategy around your digitization, then the data is somewhat irrelevant. So it's difficult to get at data. That I don't disagree with. But my sense when I replied on this was really around the non-strategic approach, the lack of alignment on any strategies that are there
Mhm.
tied to your business, your operating model. So they're the biggest challenges because they drive engagement. Then you go to data literacy. Like people don't understand the data that maybe they're getting presented with.
Mhm.
And then you get into Atul's point into the more tactical stuff. And then governance becomes a big part of it. And then lastly, I put aggregating or capturing data.
Yeah, in fact, Randy, just to build on what Leon said, I mean, there is a paper I wrote about a couple of months ago is to, how do you change the conversation around supply chain?
Mhm.
Because we all talk of very tactical ways in all companies that I work for and I worked with. Supply chains cost center, make it more efficient, make it this. All that is a very low down, it's at a director level or lower level conversation. I think we need to change the conversation around supply chain, especially having dealt with COVID pandemic in different ways. And because today it is a topic at C-suite and board level right now, because of
Right.
what they've gone through. And this is the right time to really change the conversation around supply chain as a function. And that's where it all starts, getting the guiding coalition, getting a proper strategy, Leon, as you said, having a broad agreement around, because if you don't know where you want to go,
Yeah.
all this stuff is not going to lead you there or lead you anywhere for that matter. So just my 2 cents. I mean,
Well, Atul, I'm glad you brought this up because, I've done a lot with the federal government. And one of the things we often hear is people see from where they sit. And so with respect to that, we gave you a mixture of not only strategic issues, but as you said, tactical and operational. And the whole point was for us as a steering committee to see where are we even focused. And I'm glad you brought this point and said we've got to change our focus so that we look higher, because you're right. Ideally, what we see as the third item on the list and what we see as the fourth item or fifth item on the list should have been at the very top. But I do understand, depending on where each person sits in their organization, they may not feel as if they're in a position to change those. And so that may be a reason why some of those are weighted a little lower. What we've got to figure out now as a committee is how do we speak to those strategic issues so that we do get a trickle down effect, such that then we can get to some of the more tactical and operational elements that are manifesting. And so you're spot on with respect to this. And this is why I wanted to present this exercise in this manner, because it gets us thinking in a vein that's a bit different. And so we are now 3 minutes over, And I apologize for that. But those of you who need to go, you're free to jump off. And again, we'll get this recording or the details, the notes of the recording. So a couple of things that we need to think about. And again, this was kind of just a tentative agenda that we had put out here in terms of really think about this more as timing rather than it as these are the topics that we want to cover. So we definitely want to try to do a roundtable in Q2. And I do love the idea that one of the first things maybe is a session just around one organization or two organizations sharing their stories about their digitalization journey. I think that would be appealing to a broad group. And then we can deal with some of the other things that branch out from that. We also know that we'll likely have a panel session or two coming up in the fall conference, and we'll work out the timing of that. But I want the steering committee's input relative to what do we want to talk about in that panel, and then who are the individuals we should invite, whether you self-select or whether you nominate people within your organization or in other organizations. You know, those will be things that we'll cover as we move forward here. So I'm going to let you go now that I've taken up 5 extra minutes of your time.
Randy, sorry to interrupt you. We have 60 minutes for this call.
I thought we had 45 scheduled.
I apologize. We have 60 minutes, so please go on.
Oh, okay.
And if I may interrupt and add an observation before I forget.
Yes.
I do not want our scope to be misunderstood as being confined to supply chain management. Supply chain management is commonly viewed as a functional responsibility. We use the word supply chain in the context of end-to-end responsibility, meaning looking at from drug development to patient care. So it is in that holistic perspective that we want digitization and digitalization to be pursued.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So just to pick up on your point, I completely agree. You can't look at supply chain in isolation, especially in life sciences, but the methodology, the best practices are not different.
Yes, agreed.
So I think we can still follow through with our thinking process. And I agree, let's not constrain ourselves to demand supply planning and logistics.
Right.
But basically develop a methodology to do digital transformation. And you can, I'm saying, having, I've seen it being like, I've kind of been part of being done, that the methodology, starting from Unilever's business transformation across the world, down to supply chain transformation for Mylan and everything in the middle, the methodology can be consistent.
We totally agree. And back to Randy's point, that whole issue could very well be the first roundtable discussion or presentation that we as a team envision.
Right. Because Atul, I believe it was you who made the point about the ability to redesign operating models.
Yep.
And I can tell you, working with a fair number of Fortune 200 companies, that is one of those things that even when you ask the question to identify your operating model, many of them struggle to do that.
Exactly.
And then as you get broader, you've got your various strategic business units, and they may have different operating models. But the question is do they all coalesce at some point? Or have we created such operating models that are really at odds with one another, where we have more friction than we have synergy? And so all of those are things that I believe as a steering committee, we can help to at least bring to the forefront of the conversations, even if we're not in a position to make the decisions to change those in our organizations. We're about liberating information so that organizations can then take the necessary actions. We can't force or dictate, but we can definitely say, here are the landmarks where you need to go, and here's how you measure that success. You should go almost like a vertical velocity type approach to this.
Yeah. Absolutely right. And I think the key thing from a steering committee, like if I understand the steering committee's concept here well, is more talking about how to do this, not what you're going to do, because what will depend on your company.
Right.
But how do you go about doing it is probably the most value add for everyone on this and the organization. Because we get into the what's, and that's very specific to every company. Like Heather, your company is just starting up. I've worked for companies which are 50 years old. and, and everything in the middle, right? So I think the how is probably the most valuable, and sharing experiences on how you did it rather than just what you did.
Right, right. So far what we have is having a first roundtable in Q2, and and I'll give you all a chance to take a look at your calendars and see if there's a particular timing in Q2 that works best, and we'll compare that to the BSMA calendar to make sure we're not stepping on top of anything else. Devendra, would it be helpful, or are we able to share the current calendar of things scheduled in Q2 across the board so that we know what are viable options to choose from timing wise?
Thank you for the question, because if you were to go to the website of BSMA, you'll find the current calendar for the whole year.
Good.
And obviously, as you're suggesting, our steering committee, the current one that you are here heading, needs to develop its own calendar. And what you're presenting here, I believe, is a beginning, but not the final plan that the team may want to have.
That's right. That's right. Exactly, because we want to make sure that we structure this based on the results that you all talked about in terms of the challenges. And then we as a committee will determine kind of the sequence in which we want to tackle these things here. And I will, though, say one thing we should consider is, as we are being strategic, I think at the same time, to a point that was previously made, every organization is not at that point to think that way. So we've got to make sure that we have a very balanced approach with respect to meeting some organizations where they are. And if they are operational and tactical, what are those operational and tactical challenges that they can think about today that doesn't necessarily thwart when they begin to shift over into a more strategic mindset about how to do this here. So let's not penalize those organizations that are a bit more immature in terms of the thinking or the progression. So let's be mindful of that as we think about the roundtables, so forth, moving forward.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments, team?
I just want to respond to what Atul said, because Atul represents the brilliant minds of people that really propose, rightly so, a strategic view of transformation and change and so on and so forth. In my 30, 40 years of experience, I found that to be a desirable approach, but to be an idealistic approach. And what I've seen evolve in many, many industries is some leadership provided in some functional area of an organization, or a terrible episode that took place that brings about transformation. The pandemic, COVID-19, has unleashed a lot of opportunity for transformation. I remember when the Sony pictures got hacked by the Koreans, North Koreans. Believe it or not, over the next 5 years, they all learned how to migrate into the cloud, something that they would have never done. And it was the champions in digital marketing who created the transformation of Hollywood. There was no strategic plan that any studio had in Hollywood. Nobody did. So I think we need a balance of the two.
I don't disagree with you, Devendra, but the enlightened companies don't just react to a disastrous situation. And that's what I believe in. So you are absolutely right. I'm not disagreeing with you that there are events in the world that actually trigger transformations, but that's a reactive approach.
I totally agree.
But I think there has to be a balance of both, and I buy that.
And what I request you is, one of our challenges should be to find that enlightened company who can tell us.
I work for some of them, so I can share my experiences around that.
That's exactly what we need to do. That should be one of the deliverables for our steering committee.
Perfect. Sounds good.
Perfect. Any other thoughts or comments from the rest of the committee? Okay, as always, you're always, was someone saying something?
No, I just said, looks good to me, Randy.
Okay. As always, you are welcome to communicate with me via email, via cell phone, however you want to do it. If there are any thoughts that come up along the way, I'll work with Dottie to make sure we get the notes of this, and then we'll disseminate that to you all and those who were not able to be with us, and also try to get another meeting on your calendar for next month. Do Tuesdays around the same time typically work for you all, or you say, you know what, it's just hit or miss depending on the month?
Works for me.
Okay. All right, so we'll try to shoot for the same thing. And again, I'll try to get those out at least 3 to 4 weeks ahead so that you're aware of that. And if things come up, as we know they sometimes do, it's not a problem at all. We'll always get you back up to speed. Thank you again for your time. And if there are others that you believe that could aid to help add value to this committee, be sure to pass along those names and contacts, and we'll be happy to reach out to them. I'm not of the opinion that we need 50 people. We don't need a lot of voices. We just need the right voices. So if there are other people who you believe have transformative thought processes that we could benefit from, let us know, and then we'll be happy to have them join the committee.
Randy, may I add one final thought?
Absolutely, Devendra.
On behalf of Dottie, one of Dottie's responsibilities, which you'll see displayed, everything we do on the steering committee will be captured, or virtually everything will be captured on the website for that steering committee. So all the meeting notes, all the videos, all the audio recordings, all the interactions, and she hopes to even create a method, a forum for conversation. So expect that to become real in the days and weeks ahead.
Perfect.
If you
Thank
want
you.
to see a sample, go ahead and look at the clinical and commercial steering committee. They were my first ones to set it up. You will be my second. So it's on the
That's
website. Just look under steering committee, and then a sub menu, you'll see the clinical and commercial. steering
Commercial.
committee. I will need pictures. I'm putting a face to a name. Currently it's just names and titles and companies. And I thought, let's be a little more pleasant and showing who's who. So when we have our in-house conferences, you'll know who's who when you approach them to talk to each other.
So please send us your headshots, is what she's saying.
I have yours, Tom.
All right.
I have yours, Leon.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest
Thanks,
of your
everyone.
Thank you.
Tuesday and the week. We'll talk later. Take care.
Yep. Thanks,
Have a good
everyone.
one.
Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.